How do animals adapt? According to Charles Darwin, who pioneered the theory of evolution, the vast number of different kinds of animals we see in nature came about primarily as animals were able to better survive than their parents. He first came to this conclusion after observing the finch birds on the Galapagos Islands. He noticed that there was a number of different kinds of finches, each with a unique beak that was perfectly adapted to eating the particular kind of food that was available in the area in which they lived. Darwin called the process by which new species come into existence natural selection, meaning that nature naturally selects which species are to survive and which ones are to become extinct, based on how well that they are able to adapt to their environment. This process is also known as the survival of the fittest. When evolutionists use the term adaptation to explain how animals change over time, what they mean is that living organisms learn to modify themselves in order to fit their environment. For example, camels have learned to adapt to living in areas where there is little water, while penguins have learned how to adapt to living in extremely cold temperatures. But exactly how do they adapt? In other words, what is the process that causes a camel to know that it needs to develop a huge water system in its body? Or a penguin knows that it has to develop a very thick layer of fat in order to insulate itself against the cold? According to the theory of how animals evolve, there are three reasons that account for these changes. One is through breeding, where one species of animal mates with a different kind of animal, and their offspring is born with features from both parents. For example, a mule is the offspring of a horse and a donkey. Therefore, a mule has many of the same features found in both of its parents. But it can't have something that neither of its parents have. For example, a mule can't be born with a beak or wings. Why? Because neither of its parents have a beak or a wing. But this process of evolution is limited because many species cannot mate with other species for a number of reasons. For example, an elephant can't mate with a bear, nor can a cat successfully mate with a dog. What this means is that the offspring from two different animals will still look very similar to both of its parents. For this reason, when animals mate, their offsprings don't become a different kind of an animal, such as a lion giving birth to a horse, or a chicken giving birth to an eagle. Another reason given for the evolution of animals is called the gene drift, which occurs because of changes in the population size of a particular species. But here again, this doesn't cause one kind of animal to become a completely different kind of an animal. Rather, the new species is a variation of the original animal. The third and most common reason given for why animals evolve from one kind to another has to do with changes that take place in the DNA of the animal. DNA is the instruction code that's found inside the center of every living cell that tells the cell how to function. But sometimes the DNA gets corrupted, and when that happens, it changes the instruction of how the cell is supposed to operate. We generally don't see these changes at the time that they occur, but they can become apparent in the animal's offspring. For example, an albino is one whose DNA code for hair or skin color is either missing or has become so corrupted that the cell can't understand what the code means, and so it's unable to make the proper color. These are very specific and unique changes that have to be made in a very short period of time. If an animal has to wait millions of years for these changes to take place due to accidental and random changes in its DNA, they will never survive until then. Another example of adaptation that evolutionists point to concerns caterpillars, which later become butterflies. Botanists have discovered that caterpillars and butterflies eat the leaves of the milkweed plant, which most birds and other predators strongly dislike the taste of. Therefore, for this reason, most birds don't like to eat caterpillars or butterflies. However, there is one type of butterfly, the viceroy, that doesn't feed on milkweed and is therefore at risk of being eaten by larger birds. However, according to scientists, they mimic the color and patterns of the distasteful milkweed butterflies in order to utilize this strategy for survival. According to evolutionists, this is a classic example of adaptation. But how does the viceroy butterfly know that it's at risk of being eaten? How does it know that butterflies that feed off of milkweed won't be eaten by predators? How does it know that the birds of prey identify milkweed-eating butterflies by the color and pattern on their wings? And then how does the viceroy butterfly go about producing the same color and pattern in their wings in order to fool other birds into thinking that it eats milkweed? In order to adapt to something, a living organism must first be able to recognize that there is a problem. Then it must figure out a solution that will actually fix the problem. And finally, it must have the means to implement that solution. But it takes intelligence to carry out that process. The three theories of how animals evolve, through breeding, gene drift, and accidental errors in the DNA made over millions of years, can't account for how animals are able to so quickly adapt to their environment. If all changes made to an organism are controlled by its DNA, then in order for an animal to survive quickly by adapting to changes in its environment, there has to be some sort of intelligence at work that is able to rewrite the instruction code found on that animal's DNA, because there is no other explanation for how animals adapt.